So rather than just being completely retrospective, actually let's look ahead and what are the stats telling us about what we might expect in the coming months. And to do that, we're going to use various bits of research that we've got access to via our membership of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. We're not going to share our screens and bore you with graphs and stuff, but at the end, if everyone's happy, we can provide that information, the reports, to Sharon to share amongst all the people that are in the meeting today. It's some really interesting stuff, both from a national and a local picture, and it goes into some quite granular detail as well, which might be of interest to people. So starting off with the national picture, I don't suppose you need to be an employment expert to know that it's been a relatively tumultuous time in the UK labour market since kind of March onwards. There were already, I suppose, signs of a bit of a slowdown, and obviously once lockdown hit, we saw a massive decrease in activity. But when you actually start to look past the headlines and past maybe what you see on the BBC in the morning, etc., there are, dare I use the phrase, kind of green shoots of recovery. The report on jobs, which is a report produced by the REC in association with KPMG that looks at labour market activity in recent months, shows that whilst perm and temp activity is still below kind of pre-lockdown levels, it is markedly up from where we were in April. So looking right through to the end of July, we are way ahead of where we were back in kind of April time. And when you start to look at the sector differentials within that, it's not surprising to see the biggest drop in kind of activity and demand was in retail and hospitality and catering. But the highest demand and the highest kind of upswing that we're seeing, and I'll tap into this in a little bit as well, on the permanent side, it's engineering, and on the temp side, it's blue collar workers, which kind of tallies well with our experience. That's the kind of demand side of things. From a supply perspective, staff availability, the report on that is that there's been the biggest increase in applicants on the market since December 2008, and we all know what was going on then. Although there is a caveat to that, which I'll pick up on later, because all is not necessarily as it seems when we look at what staff availability and candidate availability is with regards to the demand in the market. Although that is echoed, I suppose, by the QES, which said that 31% of businesses expected their workforce to decrease in the next 3 months. So the overall picture from a national perspective is very much one of an improving trend in terms of demand. There's still some way to go, and I think that the kind of the ifs and buts, so to speak, still stand in concerns around a potential second spike, which we still kind of read about almost daily. What the unwinding of furlough really means in terms of the impact that's going to have as the costs of furlough start to bite on businesses over the coming months. August is obviously the first month when that happens, when the E&I and pension contributions have to be absorbed by the company. I think we'll start to see businesses making some decisions then about letting staff go. And I hate to mention it, but Brexit as well. There's been some reports this week about the fact that trade talks aren't really going well, and I don't think we can kind of have our eye off that completely, because whilst the coronavirus and the impact of that is very much the here and now, and no doubt will be with us for some time to come, we do have that Brexit piece looming, and there is the potential for that to have an impact as well. So from a national picture, improving trends, but I'll just hand over to Laura now to pick very much up on that kind of the local layout.
Okay, so thanks, Ben. So throughout July, as Ben said, there's been improvement in the picture for permanent appointments. Obviously, the labour market is still very much volatile, having had 5 months of consecutive falls. And what we have access through the REC, our governing body, is some regional information that breaks it down. So we can compare the Midlands with the North, the South, and London. And actually, what we saw for July was that the Midlands fared best in terms of recovery in the number of permanent employment opportunities, and also it was the region that showed the only real growth in temporary employment as well. When you look at it all together, it looks like most of the kind of poor performance is driven by London and the South. So it looks like for the Midlands, understandably, businesses seem to be favouring flexibility. So many businesses using that flexible furlough scheme, which is great to get people gradually back into work, and also using temporary workers to plug the gaps and increase their productivity. So hopefully that real growth, and it's stark. When we send you through the graphs, you'll see that really that temporary employment is in proper growth in the Midlands versus all of the other regions which are not. So hopefully that will really start helping us to accelerate out of this. Thinking about the reasons why the Midlands might be performing better. Obviously the Midlands is kind of the home of UK manufacturing. Although aerospace and automotive, which is all over the press, has been hit really hard. You know, we are still recruiting into those sectors, but also other industries have been overperforming, like those who supply medical or food production related industries, which were strong in this area. So that's kind of what the data shows us, and as we say, we'll send that through to you to have a proper read yourselves. But we always quite like the anecdotal bits of news that we're hearing from the market. So we actually have a really good relationship with our local job centres and DWP, and I actually went there last week for a meeting just to see how they're finding things, how they're getting on, and how things locally are stacking up against what we're hearing in the press. And what they actually said was that from their perspective, they're seeing actually a similar number of roles being recruited for through the job centre than before lockdown. And I think the thing is, obviously, the types of roles that they would have advertised through them are the lower level kind of unskilled roles, which is, as we referred to, they're the ones that are picking up the quickest. And yes, they are seeing an increase in people approaching them for redundancy support, but they tend to be kind of middle management, exec type level. And they also mentioned HR actually as a particular role that they've seen an increase in, so they're not the kind of roles that the job centre would normally be helping people from. But certainly they said, you know, the number of people that they're seeing is nothing like the swathes of thousands that are being reported around the rest of the country. So that's positive as well. And that does match with what we're seeing. So at the moment, in terms of our business, we recruit across a number of sectors and a number of different types of roles. We're really busy, actually, really busy, busier than we're expecting. So particularly industrial temps. We've actually got more industrial temps out this week than we've had for 3 years. We've got over 300 industrial temps working in the local area this week. Also, excuse me, the other area that's actually held up pretty well throughout lockdown and is still strong now is IT and engineering. So you've got kind of the non-skilled, it's kind of polarised, isn't it, to completely unskilled industrial work to very, very skilled specific IT software and engineering roles. And then we're also busy in terms of offering our redundancy and outplacement services that we deliver for local businesses who are making redundancies. And the types of roles that we've been supporting people with there, where we're seeing probably most redundancies, is middle management and exec, and also a lot of PA and admin type roles. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're seeing in the market. So I'll segue neatly back to Ben, who will give even more kind of examples of what we're seeing at the moment. Yeah,
and so really just picking up on those points that Laura made, I just wanted to kind of maybe give a bit of context to that temp and perm picture locally, a couple of examples actually, and then pick up on that skills gap piece as well that we've already mentioned. So from a temp perspective, as Laura's already mentioned, we've got more people out working for us than pre-lockdown. And really, we often start to think, well, why is that? and what we've kind of drawn the conclusion of to begin with, I think, was this huge amount of pent-up demand. Lockdown really did kind of shut down swathes of the economy, and there was a lot of things waiting to be done. And so certainly, I think a lot of that has come from that pent-up demand. What's encouraging, though, is that whilst we initially thought it was this pent-up demand, many of these positions that are coming on, we're being told by the end client that they are either long-term ongoing or temp to perm positions, which means that end client really has quite a bit of confidence about the demand that they're going to be experiencing in the coming months. So again, a slightly different picture, without being overly optimistic, a slightly different picture to what you may sometimes see in the national press. where it can be a little bit, doom and gloom. And a really good example of that, and how it was driven, I suppose, by pent-up demand, but equally how they made a bit of hay, so to speak, whilst lockdown was there, was our relationship with Specsavers. So we supply three main Specsavers supply chain businesses in Kidderminster. And as you can imagine, when all the shops shut down and people couldn't go in and get their eyes tested, a couple of parts of that business really did grind to a halt. But equally, what they saw was an enormous increase in the online orders that they received. So that side of the business very quickly got very, very busy, and actually kind of helped drive, to a certain extent, our own recovery in terms of us supplying temporary labour throughout the lockdown period. And that's just a really good example of a business that actually had quite a lot going on during lockdown. Another one actually is a business that we supply, who provide equipment to farming businesses. And again, because of the kind of massive increase in food production and need of that through lockdown, they were very busy. And then since the shops have reopened, going back to Specsavers, we've seen an enormous upturn, way past their normal volumes, as people have flooded back in a COVID secure manner to those shops to get their eyes tested. And what they're saying is now is that they envisage that demand continuing, almost indefinitely, back to kind of very much the pre-lockdown levels. So it does depend on sectors, but that's just a good example of where that pent-up demand has actually ended up leading to a real kind of boom over the last couple of months. And then picking up on the perm side, and this is where I think the skills gap conversation starts to come in. Again, very much in line with the national picture, the areas where we're really seeing continued demand and have recruited for throughout lockdown using various kind of online tools is IT and engineering. The fact of the matter is there is still a skills shortage in those areas. I made a comment, I don't know whether you were on it actually, Sharon, on the British Chambers of Commerce call that we had a couple of weeks ago, that whilst there are indeed swathes of people being made redundant, certainly at the moment, the vast majority of that is happening in retail, and 5,000 people being let go by John Lewis and Boots from a retail environment doesn't necessarily solve the problem of the decades-old problem of the fact that we haven't got enough software developers or maintenance engineers in this country. So that skills gap still remains. And interestingly, picking up on the furlough piece, what furlough has allowed people to do, which it didn't allow people to do back in 08, 09, is keep hold of that talent. So whereas in 08, 09, they probably had to make a bit of a starker choice because they just couldn't afford to keep people whilst business was so low. Furlough is obviously, with the support of that government money in terms of the employment costs, allowed people to keep hold of the people they really need to, because a lot of those businesses will have learned back in 08, 09 that when you let someone go who's highly talented, it can be really difficult to replace them, precisely because that skills gap still exists within the UK. And I think a good example, just again to try and give a little bit of context to this about the kind of demand which we are seeing and experiencing in that tech side of things, is a business that we deal with just outside of Worcester. They were recruiting for a software developer. In fact, they're recruiting for several. I spoke to a candidate on the Monday morning, profiled him, registered him, submitted his details. They came back immediately, telephone interviewed him that afternoon, invited him in on the Wednesday morning of that week, and by the close of play on the Wednesday, they made him a written job offer, and he actually started 2 days ago on the Monday of this week. That is how quick the process is happening. We're seeing that across numerous positions within that area, because the businesses that need to recruit know that actually that talent is still very, very hard to find. And I'll pick back up on that skills gap piece in a little bit, because I know Nikki Hope's on the call here about what's been kind of going on locally from the skills agenda piece. But I think that a lot of the press you'll see is about how we're going to be entering this an employer-led market with swathes of candidates on the market. I think there is going to be an element of that as furlough unwinds. I think we will see some more skilled people enter the market as businesses have to absorb those costs of furlough and make some decisions. But I truly believe that it's not going to be in any way, shape or form quite as dramatic as people are maybe imagining, because A, there is still a skills shortage whichever way you dice it, and B, I think those businesses really are going to try and hang on to the talent that they've got rather than releasing it out into the marketplace, because they themselves will know how difficult it is to recruit in the future. And one final thing on that, this is an interesting side note that I was talking with someone about, and what businesses are trying to do to keep their talent, is what furlough has actually done is taught a lot of employees that they can, not necessarily want to, but they can survive on 80% of their wages. And I think you may see in the short term some businesses talking to their employees saying, well, could you do 4 days a week on 80%, and helping to manage their costs and their cash flow that way whilst they build, the business back up as we kind of come out the other side of all of this. So yeah, that's kind of a much more kind of anecdotal based piece of evidence. And I'll just hand over to Laura now, because she's going to pick up on the QES research piece and talk a bit more about that.
Okay, so yeah, as part of the webinar today, we were asked to review the quarterly economic survey, which is published by the Chamber, and kind of give our spin or our take on what we're seeing in line with that. So if you aren't regular readers of the QES, it is a really valuable report that's published every quarter. It really takes the temperature of the two counties at a moment in time. This one, the most recent one, particularly focused on the impact of COVID on employment, so it was really interesting for us. But I suppose it's funny because it's almost felt out of date as soon as it was published, because of the rate that everything is changing at the moment. The data was actually taken between the 18th of May and the 8th of June, which is pretty recently. But when you think back to what was happening in life at that time, it feels like a lifetime ago. Boris had just announced that people could go back to work if they absolutely couldn't work from home, and all the non-essential retail shops were still closed. So back then there was so much uncertainty, and I think reading the QES that really comes through. And so it'll be interesting to see, when everyone completes the new one, like for Sharon, that there'll probably be quite a change, improvement, maybe a more positive feeling as companies have had a bit more time to kind of reflect and start planning, rather than kind of really living hand to mouth as they would have been back in May. So throughout the pandemic so far, Ben and I have obviously been keeping in regular touch with our clients locally, and it's been interesting to see what they've been talking about and how things have been changing for them. And we've been talking between ourselves a lot about kind of modelling kind of what phases of recovery companies are in at any one point in time. So, and including our own business as well. So there's loads of models online that we've sort of had a look at, because we're a bit geeky like that. And there's kind of these graphs that sort of show recovery like that. And one was kind of in survive mode, and then reset, then restart, then thrive. There's another one which is quite nice, a McKinsey model, which is resilience, return, reimagination, reform. And I think back in May, so many businesses were still in that survive phase, or maybe moving into the second phase of return. Really we were just thinking about cash flow, making our organisations COVID secure so that we could start getting employees back in when we were allowed to. Real short-term thinking. So when you look at some of the questions in the QES, it's not surprising that I think the responses were fairly negative to things that are a bit further ahead, like succession planning or changing workplace practices. I just don't think it was on the radar at all then, but I think it's now, from what we're seeing in the market, companies are now starting to think more, kind of think ahead a little bit more. Got a bit more headspace for that kind of thinking, a bit more creative work that comes with running a business. So reflecting on the questions that were posed in the Quarterly Economic Survey, what are we finding that businesses are really talking about at the moment? I think the two probably main topics are, number one, flexible and remote working, and number two, mental and physical health of employees. The third, which is kind of creeping back into consciousness, is the ageing population, and that's actually covered in some really nice detail by Judy Chadwick in the QES. That's a really interesting topic, and one that we really need to get back to considering, because obviously there's several businesses locally who've got more than 50% of their workforce being over the age of 50, so that's going to creep up on us really quickly. But I think right now it's something that companies are thinking of and going, right, yes, we need to address that, but let's park it for now because we can deal with that in 6 months' time. So maybe that'll be our next webinar in a few months' time, the ageing population. But just about what people are talking about now, so flexible working, just to kind of add a few comments to that from our perspective. you know, if anyone has seen us speak in the last couple of years, flexible working is something that, you know, you can't stop us talking about. We're always on about it in terms of being able to attract and retain talent within your business. Obviously, the flexible word would suggest there's some choice in the matter, and it was rather thrust upon us, wasn't it, back in March, when we simply ran out of the office with our laptop and mobile phone, and that was it. But I think now, you know, every viable business pretty much has had to find a way of doing flexible and remote working. And so I don't think that's going anywhere, because businesses have invested a lot into that and seen the benefits and increase in productivity. So what we're hearing from businesses now, the conversation's kind of changed when we're talking about flexible working, whereas initially it was like, how do we do this? You know, what kit do you need? Whereas now it's what policies do we need in place? For like flexible working policies, remote working policies, performance management guidelines are changing quite a lot. So you know, measuring outputs much more clearly rather than inputs, or, you know, getting rid of presenteeism, and just being really clear with people what they need to achieve while they're working from home. And then other things like, you know, risk assessments, health and safety for your workplace at home, rather, yeah, you know, not just sitting with that laptop that you took home back in March, kind of getting set up with a proper computer and a proper desk phone, and just stuff like that, if it's going to be more of a permanent measure. So that's really interesting to start seeing those conversations changing, and that's really positive. And yes, as we say, from a recruitment perspective, if you've got remote working, you can access such a broader pool of people. It really opens up doors there. But obviously there are so many challenges as well with remote working, and mental health and physical health. It leads nicely onto that point, which, you know, it's been great because in the last couple of years, businesses have been talking, you know, a lot of these sort of chamber seminars have been on kind of wellbeing in the workplace, and Sharon and I are on the board of Worcestershire Works Well, and you know, it's been really on the radar, which is good, because suddenly with lockdown and remote working, we're hit with so many more issues from employees in terms of whether they're facing anxiety due to you know, the virus itself, or returning to work, or whether it's anxiety about insecurity of their job, or isolation because of not being able to kind of get into the office and be with the people that they're normally with. So there's so many different things. It's really important for companies, and we're hearing a lot about it now, that they're really trying to put some stuff in place to be able to support. I think almost it was easier in the depths of lockdown to kind of keep that sense of team and engagement and togetherness when everyone was at home and working, because it was really essential. Whereas now a lot of people are back in the office and it's busy again. And thankfully, I think those regular Zoom quizzes that we were all the obligatory meetings, you know, they've kind of phased out now, and those, you know, regular team meetings. So I think it's important to keep that at the top of your mind as to how you keep people feeling part of the team, because I think there might be a risk that some companies might start losing people if they're imposing home working on employees. We are hearing, I mean, from our own business, we try to get a lot of our team working from home more often, because they're set up to do it, but with a lot of resistance. If we're asking them to do it more than one day a week, they're kind of, we're people, we need to be around other people. So we've ended up converting a storeroom into an office to be able to just accommodate people safely. It's good that we haven't had to push it, but you know, if businesses are, I think they need to be aware that actually it could be enough to make a good person leave to want to be in an office with other people. So yeah, so Worcestershire Works Well, just signposting for that. If your business is wanting to do more around kind of wellbeing, Worcestershire Works Well has quite a lot of good downloadables. It's all free, and you can signposts to places to get support for that as well.
Laura, this is Julie Earls. Hello, good morning to everybody. Could I just add something into that, if that would be all right, just to really sort of highlight the point you were saying? I am in a position, I have just been told I'm being made redundant, fair enough. But for the last 2.5 years, I have worked for a company in a virtual team from the get-go. So I've always worked from home. And I'll be honest with you, I thought it would be great, blah-de-blah-de. I had worked from home occasionally at my previous organisation, but having been put straight away into a virtual team and you're not with your buddies at all, it was a real game changer. And reading the BBC News this morning, there's an article on there saying, oh, we're not going to go back to the office. And I think that's probably all right for a lot of people who know their colleagues right now and have worked with them, and as you've said, have had the social interaction, you know who those people are in the offices. But I think when you're starting on the get-go with a brand new team, and when they start taking on new individuals who haven't worked with these people in this company before, I think that's when problems are going to start. From myself, from my own personal experience, I think that's when some companies might start finding a few issues myself.
I think that's a really good point, Julie, and actually something we mentioned in the previous webinar we did was about when you're doing your recruitment process, how do you get across as the employer or potential employer the company culture and feel? Because a lot of people, when they go for a salary, etc., but people talk about quite often with us about a feel they get for a business.
Yes.
Very difficult to do over a video call.
Yeah.
And so we've been working with our clients to make sure that they don't miss that piece around culture and the team. And then subsequent to that, one of the businesses we work with over in Worcester, again, another tech business who are employing people completely remotely, but they've actually held off on start dates until they could open up their office securely. Because even though people are going to be working 100% remote, and I placed one guy who's based up in the middle of North Wales, in the middle of nowhere, the first 3 weeks of their employment, they have to be in the office. So they meet the team, their colleagues, meet their line manager, get a feel for the company, get a feel for the, you know, who it is that when they pick up the phone to speak to somebody, it's not just a blank face, it's actually somebody they've met, and they feel far more integrated in the team. So I think that's a really, really valid point.
Yeah, definitely. And then having kind of regular meetings and things. Similar, I've got a chap that I placed for company Kidderminster, but he lives in Wolverhampton. He's a 100% remote worker. But what they like to do is he has got a desk at the office, so they like him to pop in like once a week or something like that, just to kind of be part of the team and catch up with people. Because I think you can't really replace the relationship thing that you have with somebody when you meet them face to face, really. So I think it's important to be able to have a mix. Even regional sales roles, for example, that we're working on at the moment, you know, that have always been regional sales roles. They've never been office-based roles. Companies tend to like you to be commutable, you know, for a day. So, you know, within sort of 2 hours of wherever the head office is, just so that you can go down there for regular meetings and things like that. So yeah, I think it's definitely an example we talked about on our last webinar was platform housing, where we just recruited for a whole team of customer service people, and they were all to be 100% remote working. But that was quite nice actually, because they were all starting at the same time, doing the same job. They were all remote. They really set out very, very in a lot of detail, kind of the induction plan, and using Microsoft Teams all the time. So everything was done face to face, even though it was remote. I think that's quite nice. I think it just takes a bit more planning, really.
Yeah, I think what's been going on recently with the use of Teams and Zoom, I think has made it more face to face. I think we got stuck in a rut with using Skype, so you were just having a telephone call if you were, and you weren't seeing each other, and you don't know what people are really doing when they're still talking to you. I think it's still important as well, if I just quickly say that, you know, you're going into the office and it's not always just the meetings and the formal side of things that you're doing, but it's the chats around the kettle, you know, when you're making a cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know, you do get some gems of information from those sort of conversations as well, and that's something I know I've certainly missed over this last 2.5 years. So I just want companies to just be a little bit careful.
Very good point.
Yeah, it's the social side. Apart from anything else, it's just we're social animals, aren't we? So it's just having that, you know, connection with people. People like to come to work to kind of meet with their friends, don't they? Really?
Thank you for letting me say that. Thank you.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Just my final point then on the QES was just something I really liked actually. Bishop Fleming's little write-up that they put on there, and what they were talking about was creating not a new normal but a better normal. ensuring that they stay at the forefront of client service and employee engagement. And that particularly resonated with me as kind of, it's been a shocker the last few months, but let's take it as an opportunity to kind of reset, re-engage, take a blank piece of paper and like make decisions about actually where do we want to go from here, rather than just kind of folding straight back into what we did before. So on that note, I will hand back to Ben about where the market is going from here.
Yeah, and I'll just speak very briefly about looking ahead, so to speak, because as again we've looked a little bit retrospectively and also what's happening in the here and now. As we've already said, locally we're seeing kind of solid demand, and at the moment, touch wood as they say, we're not seeing it abating, but nevertheless we are wary about things like a second spike and certainly what the impact of furlough will be as that unfolds. But the REC do produce two other bits of research, again, things that we'll share with you, which are very much forward-looking. So Jobs Outlook, which is a survey of employers across the UK about their hiring intentions in the short and medium term, so the next 3 months and then the next 3 to kind of 12 months. And also the Jobs Recovery Tracker, which very simply is how many vacancies are being posted in the UK every week on all the various job boards. So starting with that one, back in March, the Jobs Recovery Tracker was at 1.35 million jobs being advertised in the week at the beginning of March. By kind of middle of May, that had dropped down to 950,000, so a drop of 400,000 vacancies, roughly just over a third of the vacancies wiped off. But by the first week of August, we're back up to 1.1 million vacancies already. So that shows you kind of quite how quick that recovery, that upward curve has been. Again, we wait to see how that kind of continues, or will it maybe level off as some of that pent-up demand falls away. And then from a Jobs Outlook perspective, again, this is about hiring intention. So this basically very simply surveys businesses and says, are you going to reduce your workforce greatly, reduce it slightly, keep it the same, increase it slightly, or increase it greatly? And what was really interesting on that is that on the both perm and temp side of things, and both short and medium term, it was all over, well, in fact, more like 80% were saying that it's either going to stay the same or increase in both the medium and the short term. If you go back a couple of months, and again, looking back to those months we were talking about when people were really only looking at the 6 inches in front of their face, the figures were nothing like that at all. They were far more negative in terms of what people's hiring intentions were. And interestingly, on the perm side of things, the Midlands was where it performed strongest actually in terms of hiring intentions looking ahead. So there are, definitely some positive things to take from that. And again, happy to share that report with you. And I just wanted to finish off very quickly, just by kind of bringing together two things, because Judy Chadwick was originally going to be in on this call, and Judy works for the LEP, heading up kind of the skills piece, and I think was going to kind of have an input from that perspective locally. I actually chair the Future Skills Board, the kind of the governance piece for the work that Judy does. And I just wanted to kind of address the kind of ageing workforce and skills gap thing, which Laura's already mentioned. We can't get away from it. Worcestershire, Herefordshire are both ageing demographics. There is not enough skilled people within certain areas, and there's been a huge amount of work done locally in terms of that future skills agenda to make sure that the young people coming out of schools and colleges, etc., have got the right set of skills to support the economies and the businesses within that moving forwards. And it's something I'm very passionate about, and I think it's just something that we really need to make sure we don't lose sight of. Traditionally, and it's happening at the moment, the generation of kind of 18 to 24-year-olds are the ones that get the kicking in situations like this, and it's already being borne out in terms of youth unemployment, not least because they often work in some of those key sectors or are part-time in those sectors. But we already know that apprenticeships are going to take a significant hit once furlough unwinds, and in fact they already have, and that's off the back of a couple of years of poorer performance because of the impact of the apprenticeship levy. So I think as businesses we do still have that responsibility to try and shake off the short-termist view, although I appreciate it's very difficult at the moment, and make sure we're looking ahead to kind of see what we can do to support that kind of that skills piece from that younger generation coming through. And Nikki may be able to kind of add to this in a bit, but Julie did want me to point out a few different bits of support that are out there if you are looking to recruit, and if you're interested in kind of apprenticeships and traineeships. You can get up to 3k for an apprenticeship if it's 16 to 18-year-old, or up to 2k if they're outside of that, up to 1k for a traineeship for somebody who's 16 to 24. And there's a brand new scheme called the Kickstart scheme, which is if you take a 16 to 24-year-old who had been on universal credit, you can get up to £6,500 for their first 6 months of employment. There's lots of different schemes out there, and there is one other one which is essentially kind of county council funded thing as part of their kind of Here to Help COVID scheme, which is up to 10 grand for the first year towards a graduate salary as well, if you take on a graduate. So there's pots of cash out there, and I'd advise you to kind of seek them out. I'm sure Nikki can help with a bit of that information on that, or you can get in touch with me. And that's really where we're going to finish off. Hopefully we've given you a bit of an overview of everything that's kind of going on nationally and locally. I just wanted to kind of raise that piece at the end around that kind of the skills agenda locally, because that remains really, really important. And I suppose it's back to you, Sharon, in terms of questions from the floor, or if anyone wants to put their hand up, etc., and go from there.
Sure, thanks very much, Ben and Laura. I mean, so much information there. I've definitely wrote down a few points myself as well. So thank you very much, both of you, for putting all that together and pulling those bits of research together. I don't think we've ever been in a position where we can take the quarterly economic survey data from May and June and think this is quite old information.
Yeah.
Usually we look back over a year, don't we, or something like that, and that would still be quite relevant topical data to use. So I suppose it just tells us how quickly things are changing, and completely agree with you, Laura. You know, what this quarter is going to show is probably going to be a slightly different picture again, and hopefully a more positive one. I'm sure we all feel the same on that. The other thing that I thought really resonated with me was the working from home, the flexible working, and picking up on points that Julie said. I think what we're hearing from businesses is very similar to you, that it will be a hybrid mix of that. So, you know, again, love the phrase of taking the best of some of what we've had before and just making it even better. And that's something we're looking at internally as well. So you can sort of see how it could go, but yeah, there are those challenges along the way, aren't they? They're really annoying practical ones, but they've got to be ironed out. And I guess for businesses, that takes a bit of time when there's so many other priorities as well. So yeah, thank you both very much. I did want to pick up on John's questions because he put them in quite early. Can you see the chat, Ben?
Yeah, we can see John. Hi, John.
We can't see the chat, no.
We can't see John.
Shall I read them out, or can you see them?
Or can you read them out, please?
Yes, sure. So the first one was, in addition to COVID and Brexit, has IR35 tax changes that are mainly impacting businesses and contractors had an impact on labour market and recruitment agencies?
The short answer to that is yes, but not as much as one would have expected so far, because obviously the introduction of the kind of IR35 policies was delayed by a year. But I think we'll really start to see that over the next 6 months. Contractors are often the people that are let go first in situations like this, because it's easy to do so. And I certainly, over the last, again, speaking anecdotally, in fact, I chatted to one chap just yesterday, I've seen more and more contractors who've kind of taken the decision that now this last contract has either finished or been brought to an end by coronavirus. Thinking ahead, they're now very much looking at the permanent opportunities out there and not the contract opportunities, because they are concerned about the implications of IR35 on themselves, and also some businesses are obviously pulling away from using contractors precisely for the same reason. So I don't think it's been quite as significant as one would have thought yet, but that's really only because it hasn't actually come in. But I think as we approach April next year, you'll get more and more individuals and businesses changing their tune, so to speak.
I've seen. Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say I was more interested in our local area, because I was a contractor, and I'm lucky I took retirement, so if I work, it's not a problem. But I know so many people within Worcestershire that are or were contractors that are going to be coming to an end. And as you say, all my work used to be with the Lloyds, the HSBC, working from living here but working in London for them, remote working, I might say, not travelling. And they're getting rid of 12,000, like Lloyds as an example, had 12,000 contractors. And I know that because that was my role, is looking at reducing them before I left. I don't know how they're going to manage that, but we're not seeing that in the market, if you know what I mean. It's not coming round. And there are lots of people that are contractors in Hereford and Worcestershire that I know of that will change what they want to do, I think. As you say, Ben, I think they'll go to permanent or just retire completely, depending on their age.
We certainly haven't seen the market being flooded with people. There's been a bit of an upturn with people who, used to be a contractor, they still want to work, but realistically they've seen the writing on the wall and they're prepared to go for perm now. But there hasn't been a kind of flooding of the market of people in that respect, certainly not from the tech side, which is kind of where I tend to focus on.
Yeah, I've been working on a technical director role just in the last month or so, and I have had a lot of applications from contractors who have kind of come out of automotive and aerospace, kind of looking for that level of role. But it's difficult because they've moved around so many companies. Often when companies are recruiting permanently, they want somebody who's been somewhere for quite a while, which is normally someone who's been in a permanent role. So I think there will be a challenge there. Because obviously a lot of coming out of aerospace and automotive. But in Worcestershire, we have never seen, there's never been too many contracts in the area anyway, because it's mainly bigger businesses that use contractors. So in Worcestershire, there's actually been quite light use of contractors. So hopefully it won't affect us. We'll probably be affected less than maybe other areas like London and Birmingham.
Bristol.
Yeah. But I think you might see a little spike because I think that, like me, I live in Worcestershire, but I've been working for the big companies, as you say. But now I'll most probably look for something permanent or just do something completely different and set something up myself. So sorry about that. And I did ask another question. I don't know whether you want me to read that one out as well while I'm here.
Yeah, happy to, John.
Sorry for another question. I did say sorry for another question. And I think this is quite interesting. It might just be because you've got your 16 to 24-year-olds, and then I'm a bit worried about the 25-year pluses as well. Hence a bit of my question here. So it's, to rectify the skills shortage, it's really understanding, whether there's local Hereford and Worcestershire businesses taking on what I would call capable but unskilled and inexperienced IT and engineering people with a long-term view to keeping them. As you say, they might do that for the 16 to 24-year-olds, but I am also worried about the ones that have started a career and then want to move and they're never going to be able to move. So it's just getting your thoughts on that. It's
an interesting one because there are times when we'll be speaking with clients who for whatever reason, the requirement they've got is very difficult to fill, and we encourage them to kind of think a bit outside the box and look at recruiting maybe more junior people or people who've got good transferable skills but would need upskilling in other areas. And it's definitely something we encourage because actually it's about finding the right person as much as it is about often finding the right skill set. I think the flip side of that, though, in terms of where we are right now, is that most businesses, and you only have to look at the QES to realise that, have had their sales impacted, their cash flow impacted, etc. If they are recruiting, the chances are, and this is certainly the conversations I've had in the last month or so, they want people who are as near to the finished article as possible, who are going to add value as soon as possible, because to be, to coin a phrase, they can't afford to carry anyone. And I think that you're right there, John, to point out that past the 16 to 24-year-old area, it will just be people who maybe previously had the opportunity to move between sectors or move between roles, move sideways, upwards, etc., knowing that there was a little bit of a gap there, but that they work hard to build the gap up. I think you probably will find in situations like this, and I certainly go back to 08, 09 that I worked through, and I know it was the same then, that businesses are less inclined to do that because they can't afford to carry people. They need people who can come in and after a relatively short period of time can start adding value to the business.
Yeah.
Not always the case, but unfortunately, I think that will be a general rule of thumb, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I do know a few people that are in that boat. They're in that rough age range, very capable. You know, and if they were given the chance, they'd fly. But as you say, they want people that are going to be running and on the ground straight away, and they are missing out on good people. Might be better than ones that have got skills, but I just don't know how we're going to get there. And it's just interesting to find out what your thoughts were.
Right.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, John. Just on that, Nick has put a message in the chat about some work that Nick has been doing again with Judy, I think, in the LEP, and I think it is unpicking some of that information that came out on some of the things you mentioned, Ben, the Kickstart, the Graduate, which is a Worcestershire programme. So I think Nick had something to share with the group on that, which we can send round later, because I think you were going to send me something, weren't you, Ben? Was that the stats from the REC? So if we pull both of those together and get those sent round after, that would be great. Just had Sue and Pam leaving, saying goodbye. That's all, I think. That is all the questions, unless anybody wants to come off mute. I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, but if anybody does want to come off mute and ask a question, throw Ben and Laura at the last minute. Can't see any or hand raise. No, let them off the hook too nicely there, guys. So in the meantime then, can I just say a massive thank you again to Ben and Laura from Hewett Recruitment, because your insight is always really valuable to us. So thank you for that. I think from the people that have gone and people that are on, it's been very useful information that everybody said. So thank you. And we'll share that round later.
Karen, I'll just say as well, obviously, if anyone's got anything they want to ask or raise with me and Laura that they didn't want to raise, like in a public forum, then feel free to drop one of us a note, and we'll obviously happily pick that up with them.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And reminder about the QES, I know we talk about it a lot, but we can't share the information that we shared today if we don't collect it in the first place. So that would be great if you could just click on that link. It does only take a few minutes, I promise. And the last thing I was just going to mention, just as a reminder, I was thinking of other things that we've got as chamber members, was a reminder about the 4 services legal, HR, etc. helpline that you have as part of your membership. So it's free, there are documents to download. I'm just trying to think of relative information if people are working on things like working at home policies, new health and safety requirements, if for example you might have some permanent home workers. And also with the furlough scheme, and again, some of the publicity there's been around audits and investigations into how people have managed that, all of that is covered through your chamber insurance. So if you're not aware of that, I often find that some people have forgotten that from the original time that they signed up. So I just thought if it's of interest, then you can always contact your account manager and just get a refresher on those services too. Other than that, that's it from me. So I just want to say thanks very much for everyone for joining. Again, thank you, Ben and Laura, and have a nice rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.